All right, so as Mr. O'Leary mentioned, my presentation is about AI art, and I talked a little bit about the morality, economics of it. But first, I just kind of want to talk about art in general. So here are three different mediums of art: photography, painting, and drawing. But if you're observant, you might see these little colored squares at the bottom of each of them. And this is because each of these are made by DALL-E, OpenAI's generative art program. Now, you may be wondering, what exactly is a generative art program? So it's exactly as the name suggests. It's a program that generates art. And first, we started with a program that easily integrated chance with mathematical equations, think fractals, which is why I have a lovely photo of a fractal here. And now that when we talk about generative art programs, we more generally talk about sort of text to art functions. And this is a program that converts a user input text into an image. They're also often called art AIs. Stable Diffusion and DALL-E are kind of the two main sort of art AIs that you'll hear when we talk about them. And even when given the same prompt, they will produce different images. Now, I have some examples for you. So when given the same exact prompt of a photorealistic image of a monarch butterfly in a leafy area, now I just want you to picture this in your heads because I'm going to give you two side-by-sides. They produce different images. So these are the two images that they produce, and I kind of want to show of hands. Maybe let's do a raise of hands if you thought more on the right, and then a raise of hands if you thought more on the left. Okay. And then again, we can do this with abstract paint splashes. Now, this prompt is, albeit a lot less informative than the last prompt that I gave. So again, I just want you to think about this in your head. Now, if you were thinking more on the left, can I see a raise of hands? And if you're thinking more on the right, right? And then one more, a drawing of still life fruit plate, charcoal, and paper. I think this is maybe a project that a lot of us have done in school. So maybe think about when you were taking a visual arts class, what you made, and then here's a side-by-side. If you were thinking more on the right, and then if you're thinking more on the left. Now, these are, I think, the most similar out of all three, but still, all of them are different images. And this is because of the way that these models are trained. And the way that these models are trained is that you take millions and millions and millions of images from across the internet, and you train the program to recognize patterns. With all of the images that are taken off the internet, there is no regard to whether the work is copyrighted or whether the original creator is informed. And then this is where we come into a little bit of trouble. So with original creators not being informed whether their images are being used to train these programs, they're therefore unable to consent to their use. And generally, they will be used regardless of whether or not the creator is able to consent to this. So now I want to dive into some questions that sort of guided my process for this research. So the first question that I have is, when does it become unacceptable to mimic an artist's style? I think I personally have heard a lot when I'm in a visual art class that you want to steal like an artist. You want to take inspiration from other artists and use it to create your own art. When does it become unacceptable for a person to do this compared to a computer? What is different about using artwork that someone has created as inspiration versus training an AI model to do the same exact thing? Another question is, where does AI need regulation and where does it not? This is going to come up a lot during this presentation. And my general question is, like, do we need to regulate a toaster that knows when your toast is perfectly golden brown? And do we probably should regulate a car that can drive itself. I don't know. That's kind of my opinion, though. And the big one is, how should AI be regulated? So kind of taking a dive into these problems, I also want to talk about the economics of generative art programs. And the way that I sort of see it is there's two sides of like artist versus developer. And of course, these are not clear lines, and you're not always going to have the same opinions as everyone on one side and the same opinions of everyone on the other side. But this is kind of the way that I split it up in my head. So kind of thinking about the artist, creating art can be a primary form of income for a lot of artists. So having generative art programs that create images based off of prompts in seconds, that takes away a lot of an artist's commissions. And this is like, it's sort of taking away from them their form of creation. But on the other side of things, developers also are allowed to, they have the same right to create and put out into the world their work. So, right, the artist has the ability to create art and create commissions from art and use their skill in that way, but developers have the same exact right. And this brings us to the question of who's given priority in their right to create. Are artists given priority because they are more human, or is developers given priority because the world that we live in now is so technologically focused? Then the next point that I have is that art programs are trained on artists' work without their consent. I mentioned this earlier, but I think this is a big, big thing. There's actually litigation currently surrounding Stability AI, which I had mentioned earlier. And I don't know if you were paying attention, but all of the images on the right were from Stability AI and all of the images on the left were from DALL-E. And so currently there's litigation concerning the images that generative art programs use, specifically Stability AI has come into question as they're trained on all of these images. And the process that, this is getting a little bit techy, but the process that generative art programs use is a kind of interpolation or layering of images. The issue arises not necessarily with individual artists' work, but more copyrighted images. As again, like I mentioned, the programs don't take into account whether or not something is or is not copyrighted. There's currently litigation against, again, Stable Diffusion's developer, Stability AI, because of their use of copyrighted material in their training sets. And then, like I mentioned earlier, what is the difference between an AI taking all of these images and layering them on top of each other and people being taught to steal like artists or taking from other artists and taking inspiration from them? And then this creates a question of like, is it immoral to imitate artists when it is an AI, and what makes it more acceptable as a human? Is it something about the consciousness? And when we're talking more about the creation of AI and the possibility that there is consciousness in AI, what makes it more moral for a human to imitate artists compared to an AI? Right. And then I want to talk a little bit about policies. So I didn't do too much diving into the policies, and everything is very new. However, NIST, which is the National, if I can find the notes, it's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, releases the RMF, or the Risk Management Handbook, or sorry, Risk Management Framework, which is a 7-step process, which, as you can see around the little circle, those are the 7 steps. Prepare, categorize, select, implement, assess, authorize, and monitor. And this is generally a framework to, with any general process or new technology, so not necessarily focused at AI because it's such a new thing. And like I said, it can be applied to any new system or technology, and it outlines potential harms. The potential harms that it outlines are a person's liberties, harming the global supply chain, harming an organization's reputation, and just generally, AI is so new that there are no definitive policies on it. When I was doing my research, the RMF 2.0, which is sort of the newest version of the risk management framework, came out, I think, in early January, so right when I was starting my research. And so now I want to go back to a question that I brought up earlier. When does AI need to be regulated? Like I said, do we need to regulate toasters and that have the use of AI, knowing exactly when your toast is perfectly golden brown? What about cars? And where does art generation fall on this spectrum of triviality and seriousness? Thank you.